Guys, good time of year. Bowl games are back. Hope everybody had a wonderful Christmas, wonderful holiday season. We're getting to the new year, so I hope everybody's enjoying themselves out there. All right, Pete Carroll. Pete Carroll, great, legendary USC coach and a terrific coach with the Seattle Seahawks. Guy was also with the New England Patriots as well. He's like, I want to get back into the NFL, and I even want to get back to the Chicago job. So my good buddy Jordan, I'll give a shout out to him. He likes Pete Carroll. He even wants Carroll for the New York Jets. Says he's a program builder, and that certainly is true. So there are certain things that Carroll brings to teams. Carroll brings some cachet. He brings positive momentum, positive energy, into the building. He's a guy that can break a dead program and come on in there, and there's no one who has more enthusiasm that is out there than Pete Carroll. Guy is a lightning rod. Guy is terrific. He even was kind of vindicated in getting rid of Russell Wilson, sending him to Denver, and then he was able to get back, Geno Smith, or he was able to start Geno Smith, and they had those years of success with DK Metcalf and that unit. So, made the playoffs, even with Geno Smith, but hasn't really been a factor in the NFC in quite some time, and they struggled with Schottenheimer and Russ. They struggled, unfortunately. I believe Schottenheimer's now with the Dallas Cowboys, so it would be interesting if Brian Schottenheimer, and I'll double-check on that to see if Schottenheimer's with the Cowboys, because he's doing a nice job with Cooper Rush. Yeah, so Schotty's with the Cowboys right now. So Pete Carroll, I do have some concerns, though. Pete Carroll, his age is a concern. He's 73 years old, so some people look at that as a strength. I look at that as kind of a worry. When we look back to his yearly record in the National Football League for Seattle, in 2020 with Russ, that was the last season where Russ was truly unlocked. Boy, they lost to, it says 2020, they lost to the LA Rams in a wild card matchup. Interesting. I guess that was Jared Goff. I actually forget that game. I do. Interestingly enough. Oh, yeah. I kind of remember. Terrible defense or very defensive-led performance. And then, Jared Goff and the Rams then got slaughtered in Green Bay that year to Aaron Rodgers. Ever since then, the last three seasons he's coached has been 7-10, 9-8, and then actually last year 9-8. So overall, not bad. Now, he did have the Legion of Boom. All right. So, if you're Pete Carroll in this situation, you're pretty decent at hiring coaches because you had Dan Quinn as a defensive coordinator for a while. Chris Richard was over there being a defensive menace. And then on the offensive side of the ball, you were able to have Darrell Bevell and Brian Schottenheimer that were able to work. And you kind of had some decent running games. So in Chicago specifically, there was some animosity between Pete Carroll and Russell Wilson towards the end. I know Caleb Williams is a Southern Cal graduate. I wonder if Caleb Williams and Pete Carroll would get along like they did with Russ. But really, when I look at an older Carroll, and now with the influx of offenses, and there's so many great offensive minds that are out there, I just think that there's other ways to go with the hire. But Chicago, for Pete Carroll, it's certainly interesting. When I look at some of these jobs that are out there, you have the Jets job, you have the Raiders job. For the Raiders specifically, the Raiders might come open. The Raiders isn't official yet. So there are going to be some places that want to have like a character builder, but or want to have a guy that could take over a program. But really, when you're bringing in a new quarterback and you're trying to get a new quarterback up to speed like they are with all these jobs, I really want a pretty decent play caller. So I want the mold of a Kevin O'Connell, somebody who comes to Minnesota or comes to your team and immediately, like, scheme-wise, you're there. Now, you also need to somehow find a coach as well that makes each part of the other parts of the team go better as well. So you need a presence. And I think that in Chicago, I think that really in Jacksonville, you kind of can use or you need a bigger presence than say a Kellen Moore, who's a really quiet kind of a guy. Ben Johnson seems kind of quiet. It's not going to be easy to rewrite and flip the script in Chicago. But who would Pete Carroll hire to then run the offense? And considering Pete Carroll is really tight with Shane Waldron, it is interesting that since Waldron got ousted, that Pete Carroll's also interested. Also, John Schneider and Pete Carroll had a big, they had a good friendship. And I think that Carroll at this age is going to want a lot of power. And up there, Ryan Poles really has a lot of power. So I think that Pete Carroll, like going to Jacksonville, is pretty attractive because you have your quarterback, you're in warm weather. That program just needs like some of that fun, some of that. I know Doug Peterson is a nice guy, but Pete Carroll can then give that program some like real direction. The New York Jets, that's an intense media market, I think, for Pete Carroll. So really, if I were Jacksonville, I would seriously consider it. And I would also try to be really creative with like young hires because like Pete Carroll's like a defensive-led coach and it can work, but then you're going to have great offensive coordinators. And the problem too with hiring a defensive coach and then you have a good offensive coordinator is that coordinator's going to leave. Like, look at Tampa Bay. They might lose out on Liam Cohen now, and they lost out on Dave Canales. The Eagles, they lost Shane Steichen, and then Brian Johnson took over, and that offense looked nothing alike. So then, if you have a hotshot offense, look at Detroit. They can go from best to worst with a change at coordinator. Whereas the Packers and the Vikings have had stability because this league's all about the quarterback and it's mostly about the play caller. So the candidate that I think is very attractive is like a young defensive candidate. So I think Mike McDonald's like a defensive whiz. And I think that there's a couple of these guys that are out there. I think that Ben Minter is one of these guys. Ben Minter comes from the Harbaugh tree, and he's pretty brilliant, and he's out there, in L.A. doing his thing for the Chargers. I think he would be potentially a good option. And then Zach Orr. Zach Orr is 30 years old. He's entrusted to run the Ravens defense. I think he's an absolute star in the game. I also think that Darryl Glenn, the D coordinator of the Lions, is going to get a lot of offers as well. I just think in Chicago with Ryan Poles, Shane Waldron just got fired. I don't think it's a perfect fit for Pete Carroll. I think that I think Jesse Minter would be a really interesting fit in Chicago. Probably Ben Johnson, if Ben Johnson would ever want to go and work with Caleb Williams there, and there could be some attraction with working with Williams. I think an offensive coach that wants to work with Caleb Williams is really the route to go here. I think even Joe Brady could be a little bit interesting in Chicago with Caleb Williams. But again, Joe Brady, it's tough because either you're a great play caller and you maybe don't have experience leading an entire team, like Joe Brady's kind of quiet. Kellen Moore could have those same problems. And then if you end up getting in trouble and your team is reeling, like, are you going to have the interpersonal skills as a now coach to like get your team through those kind of turbulent times? And we're seeing Dable have trouble with doing that. So I do think that there are spots in the NFL when I look at them that are interesting for Pete Carroll. Even Vegas is interesting for Carroll. Even the Jacksonville Jaguars would give him some cachet. I just worry about the age of Carroll, to be frank. And I'd rather have a coach that's probably that is in his 30s or 40s that can do it for about 10 or 15 years, kind of like Matt LaFleur. But hey, like Carroll can maybe rebuild it. And the Jets have had, a lot of problems and troubles. And they went with Robert Saleh, defensive coordinator, culture builder, and it didn't really work. So the Jets, they tried to go with Adam Gase, who was a play caller, but he wasn't even that good of a play caller. And then, that's why Liam Cohen's interesting, because of Baker Mayfield, because he's taken Baker, and Ben Johnson seems like pretty dynamite play callers. Same with I would also look at guys Kellen Moore, and I would also look at the coach Jesse Minter. So those are the top guys that I see on the market. But for Chicago, it's not really an easy fix. They got to get the defense in place. Would a guy like Vrabel get that defense right, make them competitive, and would Caleb, kind of be okay with an intense Mike Vrabel? Could Minter come in and bring some attitude into that program? So it's worth talking to Pete Carroll. He's obviously a legend of the game. The last 3 years were decent. I think for a downtrodden team like the Jacksonville Jaguars, I think that Pete Carroll can give them some cred, and they can roll. And I think that he makes a lot of sense there. Even the New York Giants are potentially an interesting option for Pete Carroll to see if he can finally get the Giants and that football program out of the dumpster and get them on a better track. So the more I think about it, the more open I am. Obviously, with a coach like Carroll, though, then the staff is going to be even more critical. But a little bit older and do have my worries. So a long-winded video, but presented you the pros and the cons. What do you guys think about it?